For 7 years, a Texas millionaire's daughter lived in absolute silence. Her father, James, owned one of the biggest real estate empires in the state, but he couldn't buy his little girl a single sound. He flew in audiologists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Stanford. Specialists from around the world examined her. Millions of dollars spent. Hundreds of tests run. Zero answers. Then one hot August afternoon, everything changed. A homeless 12-year-old black girl, no medical training, no education past 6th grade, surviving on the streets, stopped outside the estate gates. Her name was Joan. She looked at Helen's ear for less than 30 seconds and felt something every expert in America had missed. In under 3 minutes, Joan pulled something out. Helen heard her first sound, a dog barking across the street. After 7 years of silence, she finally heard her father's voice. But what Joan pulled out of that ear, that's when everything turned dark. Because it wasn't a medical mystery. Someone put it there deliberately. A device designed to keep a little girl trapped in silence. And when the FBI traced it back to who ordered it, when they found out who had access to Helen as a baby, it destroyed that family forever. Before we continue, subscribe right now and comment where you're watching from. Because the person who did this, they were eating dinner at that table every single night. The delivery room at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston went silent for all the wrong reasons. James stood frozen next to the hospital bed, watching the nurses work over his newborn daughter with movements that were too fast, too urgent. His wife, Catherine, was asking questions he couldn't hear through the ringing in his ears. But one sound was missing. The sound every father waits for. Helen wasn't crying. Why isn't she responding? James's voice cracked as he pushed closer. Doctor, why isn't she crying? The pediatrician's face was carefully neutral in that way medical professionals practice when they're about to deliver bad news. She clapped her hands next to Helen's tiny ear. Nothing. She did it again, louder this time. The baby's eyes stayed unfocused, staring at nothing, her miniature chest rising and falling in perfect silence. Mr. Mitchell, we need to run some tests. The tests came back 3 days later. Congenital hearing loss. Cause unknown. Severity, profound. Total deafness. The audiologist used words like bilateral sensory neural and no response across all frequencies, while James sat in that sterile consultation room holding a daughter who would never hear him say her name. Catherine cried quietly beside him. He didn't cry. Not yet. He was too busy making plans, running calculations, thinking about which specialist to call first. That first night home, James sat in the nursery at 3 a.m. with Helen sleeping against his chest. Grand Horizon Heights, his pride, his legacy, 40 acres of Texas paradise just outside Houston, felt hollow. Through the window, he could see the white-columned mansion glowing in the moonlight, the stables where Catherine's horses were sleeping, the infinity pool that cost more than most people's houses. He'd built an empire, turned dirt and blueprints into one of the biggest real estate portfolios in the state. He could buy anything, but he couldn't buy his daughter a single sound. I'll fix this, baby girl, he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time. Helen's fingers curled around his thumb. So small, so perfect, so silent. Daddy's going to fix this. I promise you. Whatever it takes. However much it costs. You're going to hear me say, I love you. You're going to hear your mother laugh. You're going to hear music and thunder and your own voice. I swear to God, Helen. I'm going to fix this. She couldn't hear the promise. But he meant every word. What James didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know in that moment, was that Helen's silence wasn't an accident of biology. Someone had made sure she would never hear. Someone close. Someone he trusted. Someone who was planning to sit at his dinner table, smile at his daughter's birthday parties, and watch a little girl suffer in silence for 7 long years. And they would have gotten away with it forever if a homeless child hadn't stopped at his gates one August afternoon and trusted what her hands could feel. Rochester, Baltimore, California, Germany. For 7 years, James turned his empire into a desperate search engine, flying Helen to every specialist who would take his call. Mayo Clinic doctors ran tests for 3 weeks straight. Johns Hopkins brought in their top audiologists. Stanford tried experimental stem cell treatments that cost $500,000. He even took her to a research facility outside Berlin where they used technology that wouldn't be FDA approved for another decade. Every single one said the same thing. There's nothing structurally wrong, Mr. Mitchell. Her ear canal is perfect. The cochlea is intact. The auditory nerve appears functional. We just don't know why she can't hear. How is that possible? How could everything be perfect and nothing work? James stopped going to board meetings. His partners at Mitchell and Associates called constantly. Deals were falling through. Clients were getting nervous. The company needed him. He didn't care. While his business empire started cracking at the foundation, he sat in his study until 4 a.m., reading medical journals he barely understood, drinking bourbon he didn't taste, searching for an answer that didn't exist in any textbook. Helen turned 3, then 5, then 7. She learned sign language from a private tutor. She watched other children play at country club events, their mouths moving in laughter she couldn't hear, their joy existing in a world she couldn't enter. At her 6th birthday party, 12 kids sat around the table singing, "Happy Birthday," while Helen sat perfectly still, watching their lips move, knowing what they were saying but never hearing it. The looks on their faces, that mix of pity and discomfort, made James want to burn the whole mansion down. "I built an empire," he told Catherine one night after another failed appointment. She'd stopped going to the consultations after Germany. She couldn't watch Helen get poked and prodded anymore, couldn't hear another doctor say, "Nothing we can do," in that professional, sympathetic tone. "I can negotiate billion-dollar deals. I can buy anything in this state, but I can't help my own daughter." Catherine didn't answer. She'd stopped answering months ago. Helen sat in her room upstairs, 7 years old, pressing her hand against the wall to feel the vibrations of the washing machine 3 floors below. It wasn't sound, but it was something. She'd learned to find comfort in things that weren't quite what she wanted. Because what she wanted, to hear her father say, "I love you," just once, seemed impossible. At least, that's what everyone thought. Until a homeless girl with nothing to lose stopped at their gates and changed everything. Joan's grandmother died on a Tuesday in March when Joan was 9 years old. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. After that, Joan had nobody. No parents. They died in a car accident when she was 3. No aunts, no uncles, no cousins who wanted a sad little black girl with nothing to offer but grief and need. The Texas foster system took her. Placed her with the Hendersons first, then the Rodriguez family, then a group home in southeast Houston where the older kids stole her clothes, and the house mother looked the other way when things got violent. Joan ran on her 11th birthday. Didn't pack. Just walked out during breakfast and never looked back. That was over a year ago. Now she lived in a drainage tunnel under I-45, where the traffic noise was so constant it became a kind of silence. She slept on flattened cardboard boxes, her grandmother's shawl wrapped around her shoulders, the only thing she'd taken when she ran. Every morning, she woke up and started the same routine. Walk to the Shell station on Westheimer. Check the dumpster behind it for anything still wrapped in plastic. Collect bottles from a park. Stay out of sight when police cruisers rolled by. Stay invisible. Being invisible wasn't hard. People looked right through homeless kids. But Joan had something nobody could see, something even she didn't understand. She felt things. Wrong things. Dangerous things happening inside people's bodies. It started after her grandmother died. This pull, this knowing. Once, at a bus stop downtown, she'd grabbed a man's arm and said, "Sir, your heart. Something's wrong with your heart right now." He'd laughed at her, called her crazy. Then he collapsed 2 minutes later. Massive heart attack. The paramedics said she'd saved his life by making him sit down, by making someone call 911 early. He didn't even remember her face. Nobody ever did. "I'm smart," Joan whispered to herself sometimes, sitting in that tunnel while trucks roared overhead. She'd gotten straight A's before her grandmother died. Mrs. Patterson, her fifth-grade teacher, said she could be anything.
Doctor.
Lawyer. Engineer. That was before the group home, before the streets, before her clothes started smelling like garbage and people crossed to the other side of the sidewalk when they saw her coming. I could have been somebody. But now she was just another homeless kid in Houston. Invisible. Worthless. Trash people stepped over on their way to somewhere better. At least that's what she believed. Until she walked past a mansion in Grand Horizon Heights and felt that pull again, stronger than it had ever been before. Grand Horizon Heights wasn't Joan's usual territory. Too far from downtown, too many cameras, too many neighbors who called the cops the second they saw someone like her. But the recycling bins in rich neighborhoods were better. People threw away bottles with deposits still on them, sometimes even cans of food that were barely opened. Wasteful, but useful. She walked down Magnolia Drive with her trash bag slung over her shoulder, checking bins, staying quiet. The houses here were massive. Not just big, movie star big. Lawns that looked like golf courses. 3 car garages. The kind of places where her grandmother used to clean houses before she got sick. Then Joan saw the estate. 40 acres easy, maybe more. White columns. Iron gates. A circular driveway that could fit 10 cars. And standing inside those gates, alone on that perfect green lawn, was a little girl in a pink sundress. She was crying. Not the loud kind of crying. The silent kind. Tears running down her face while she touched her ear over and over, like she was trying to dig something out. 7 years old. Maybe. White girl with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Everything about her screamed privilege. The dress probably cost more than Joan earned in 6 months of collecting bottles. But something was wrong. Joan felt it. That pull. That knowing that made her skin prickle and her stomach drop. The same feeling she'd had at the bus stop. The same feeling she'd had 3 weeks ago when she'd grabbed a woman's hand outside a CVS and said, "Ma'am, you need to check for a lump in your left breast." The woman had cursed at her. Found the tumor 2 days later. This was different. Stronger. Joan walked toward the gate. The girl looked up, saw her. Dirty clothes, trash bag, clearly homeless, and didn't run. Most people did. Most people looked away. But this girl just stared at her with these huge, desperate eyes, still touching that ear. Joan stopped at the gate. Pointed at the girl's ear. Made a face like, "Does it hurt?" The girl nodded, so hard her whole body shook. For the first time in 7 years, someone had noticed. Not the hearing aids. Not the sign language. Not the silence. Someone saw that something was wrong beyond what the doctors kept saying. Joan looked at the gate. 8 feet tall, iron. Definitely locked. But there was a lower section near the hedges where the decorative spikes weren't as high. She could climb it. She'd climbed worse. This was trespassing. This could get her arrested. This could get her thrown back into the system. She didn't care. Joan threw her trash bag over, grabbed the iron bars, and pulled herself up and over. Landed on that perfect grass in her torn sneakers and walked right up to the millionaire's daughter like she had every right to be there. They sat down together on the lawn. Homeless girl and rich girl. 2 outcasts from completely different worlds. Helen pointed at her ear again. Joan nodded. "Let me see," Joan said, even though she knew the girl couldn't hear her. But Helen understood. She turned her head, moved her blonde hair aside, and showed Joan what every doctor in America had missed. Helen's ear looked wrong. Not obviously wrong. Joan wasn't a doctor, didn't know the technical terms. But the skin around the hearing device was discolored. Angry red patches mixed with spots that looked almost yellow, like a bruise that wouldn't heal. And there was swelling. Subtle, but there. Joan reached out slowly, letting Helen see her hand coming. She touched the area with just her fingertip, barely any pressure. Helen's whole body flinched.
Pain.
Real pain. Not the kind that comes from infection or inflammation. Something else. Something deeper. Joan closed her eyes, let that feeling wash over her. The same instinct that had saved the man at the bus stop, the woman outside CVS. Her grandmother used to call it the knowing. Said it ran in their family back generations. said Joan's great-great-grandmother in Louisiana could touch a person and tell you exactly what sickness was eating them from inside. Something's in there, Joan whispered. Something that doesn't belong. Hey! Joan's eyes snapped open. A man in a security uniform was running across the lawn, moving fast, radio in one hand. Big guy. Former cop, probably. The kind who wouldn't ask questions first. Get away from her. Now. Joan scrambled backward, but Helen's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for such a small girl. Her eyes were desperate. Pleading. Don't leave. Ray arrived, breathing hard, positioning himself between Joan and Helen like Joan was some kind of predator. What the hell are you doing? How did you get in here? He was already reaching for his radio. I'm calling the cops. There's something wrong. Joan's voice came out shaking, but she forced herself to stand up, forced herself to look him in the eye, even though her instincts screamed to run. Something in her ear. I can feel it. Ray looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You're a homeless kid. He said it like it explained everything. Like it meant she couldn't possibly know anything worth knowing. What do you know about medicine? I know when someone's hurting. Joan pointed at Helen, who was still sitting on the grass, tears streaming down her face now. And she's hurting bad. Look at her. Really look. Ray hesitated. He'd worked security at Grand Horizon Heights for 3 years. He'd watched this little girl grow up in silence, watched her father spend millions trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, watched her sit alone at birthday parties, watched her press her hands against windows to feel the vibrations of thunder she'd never hear. Helen was signing. Fast, frantic, her small hands moving in that language Ray had learned just so he could talk to her. Let her help. Please. Something's wrong. It hurts. Let her help. Ray looked at Joan, looked at Helen, made a decision that would change everything.
Fine.
But if you hurt her, I will end you. Ray crossed his arms, jaw tight. 60 seconds. That's all you get. Then I'm pulling you off and calling her father. Joan nodded, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She reached into her grandmother's shawl, the threadbare thing wrapped around her shoulders, and pulled out the safety pin. The only one she had. She'd been using it to hold the shawl closed at night when the wind got cold in the tunnel. What are you going to do with that? Ray's voice went up an octave. Help her. Joan knelt next to Helen, held the pin up so the girl could see it. This might hurt, but I'll be fast. I promise. Helen nodded, reached out and grabbed Joan's free hand, squeezed it.
Trust.
Complete trust from a girl who had no reason to trust anyone anymore. Joan's hands were shaking as she angled the pin behind the hearing device. The skin was hot to the touch, inflamed. She probed gently, carefully feeling for it there. Something hard, metallic, not part of the hearing aid. Something lodged deep in the ear canal, hidden behind the medical device where nobody would think to look. Helen was crying, her small body trembling, but she didn't pull away. She held Joan's hand tighter. I don't want to hurt you worse, Joan whispered, even though Helen couldn't hear her. Maybe we should wait for, Ray started. If we wait, she'll keep suffering. Joan didn't look up, didn't break focus. I can get it out. I know I can. She adjusted the angle, hooked the pin around whatever was in there, felt it catch. This was going to hurt. This was going to hurt badly. Joan took a breath and pulled. Helen's mouth opened in a silent scream, her back arching. Then her head snapped toward the street. 3 houses down, a dog was barking. A golden retriever behind a fence, barking at a squirrel. Helen's eyes went wide, not with pain, with shock, with something that looked like terror and wonder mixed together. Did you? Joan's voice came out breathless. Did you just hear that? Helen nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face now for completely different reasons. She pointed at her ear, then at the dog, then at the trees where wind was moving through the leaves, at the car driving past on the street, at birds somewhere overhead. Her hands were shaking as she touched her ear, touched Joan's face, touched the grass beneath them like she was making sure this was real.
Sound.
After 7 years of absolute silence.
Sound.
Joan opened her palm. A tiny metallic capsule lay there, no bigger than a grain of rice, covered in dried blood and tissue. Not medical. Not biological. Manufactured. Deliberate. Ray's face went white. What the hell is that? Joan stared at the thing in her hand, that knowing feeling still pulsing through her, but now it was screaming something different. Something darker. This wasn't an accident. Someone did this. Someone put this inside a baby's ear and let her suffer for 7 years. James's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway at 4:47 p.m. He'd left a board meeting early, something he never did, because Ray had called his cell 3 times in a row. No message. Just missed calls. That usually meant trouble. He saw them on the lawn before he even got out of the car.
Ray.
Helen. And some kid in filthy clothes he'd never seen before. James was running before his brain caught up. What's happening? Helen, are you okay? Ray turned, and his face looked wrong. Not scared. Not angry. Something else. Something James couldn't identify, because he'd never seen his head of security cry before. Sir. Ray's voice was shaking. I think your daughter can hear. The world stopped. That's not possible. Helen turned toward him. Turned toward his voice. Not toward his movement, not toward Ray pointing. She turned because she heard him. James's knees hit the grass. Baby? Can you hear me? Helen nodded, tears streaming down her face, and her mouth opened. 7 years of speech therapy. 7 years of trying to teach her to make sounds she'd never heard. Her voice came out raspy, uncertain, like she was speaking underwater.
Daddy.
James collapsed. Just completely fell apart right there on his perfect lawn. He grabbed Helen, pulled her into his chest, and sobbed like he hadn't sobbed since the night she was born. She was saying it over and over, Daddy, 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 like she was testing the word, tasting it, making sure it was real. Then James saw her. The homeless kid standing 6 feet away, something small and metallic in her palm. Who are you? The girl flinched like he'd hit her.
I'm nobody.
I pulled that out of her ear. James stood slowly, Helen still clinging to his suit jacket. He walked over, held out his hand. The girl dropped the capsule into it. It was the size of a rice grain. Metallic. Manufactured. There were serial numbers etched into the side, so small he could barely see them. His blood went cold. This isn't medical. His voice came out flat.
Dead.
Someone put this here. Someone put this inside my daughter's ear. He looked at the girl, really looked at her. 12, maybe 13. Black. Homeless, clearly. Wearing clothes that probably hadn't been washed in weeks. Holding a safety pin like it was a surgical instrument. You saved my daughter's life. His throat was closing up. What's your name? Joan. She was backing away now, toward the gate. But I should go. I'm not supposed to be here. I was just collecting bottles and I saw her, and You're not going anywhere. James's voice came out harder than he meant. He softened it. Not until I understand what you just did. Not until I understand who did this to her. Joan stopped. Looked at Helen. Looked at the capsule in James's hand. I think, she said quietly, whoever did it was someone you trusted. The FBI arrived within 3 hours. Agent Maria Torres, Crimes Against Children Division, took one look at the capsule under a microscope and went silent for 30 seconds. When she looked up, her face was stone. This is a custom-made signal jammer, designed specifically to block auditory nerve signals without causing structural damage that would show up on standard scans. She pointed at the serial number. This wasn't manufactured overseas. This was made in America, and it's traceable. It took the FBI 4 days. 4 days of following paper trails, subpoenaing records, tracking shell companies, and wire transfers. The device came from a medical tech company in Dallas that specialized in experimental neurology equipment. The purchase order was 7 years old. Paid in full. Cash wire transfer. The buyer's name made James's world stop spinning. Victoria Brennan. His business partner. Helen's godmother. The woman who'd been at every birthday party, every failed doctor's appointment, every family dinner for 7 years. James called her to his study, told her the FBI had questions, told her to come alone. She arrived in a black pantsuit, briefcase in hand, looking like she was headed to a board meeting. She saw James's face and knew immediately. You found it. Not a question. A statement. James's hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of his desk. Why? Victoria set down her briefcase, perfectly calm. She was defective, James. You were going to leave everything to a deaf child who'd never run the company, who'd never be anything but a burden. She's my daughter. She was a liability. Victoria's voice stayed level, professional, like she was explaining a business decision. I built this empire with you. 20 years. Every deal, every negotiation, every late night. I deserved half. But you gave her everything at 18. Everything I earned. The room felt like it was tilting. The audiologist, Dr. Chun. I paid him $500,000 to implant it during her initial fitting. She was 8 months old. So easy. So simple. Nobody questioned the godmother being in the room. Victoria smiled, and it was the most horrible thing James had ever seen. Chun fled to Mexico 3 years ago. Good luck finding him. The study door opened. Helen walked in. 7 years old. Hearing every single word for the first time in her life. Why did you hate me? Victoria's face cracked. Just for a second. Just long enough for something human to show through. I didn't hate you. I wanted what I built. Helen walked closer. This tiny girl in a pink sundress, approaching the woman who'd stolen 7 years of sound from her life. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet James barely heard it. I forgive you. Victoria broke. Completely shattered. Fell to her knees sobbing like a child. Agent Torres walked in with 2 other agents. They had handcuffs ready. Victoria Brennan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit child abuse, attempted grievous bodily harm, and obstruction of justice. James watched them take her away. Watched his business partner, his friend, the woman he'd trusted with everything, get let out of his house in handcuffs. Helen stood next to him, holding his hand. She's not coming back, is she? Helen's voice was still uncertain, still learning. No, baby. She's never coming back. 6 months later, Joan still woke up sometimes thinking she was in the drainage tunnel under I-45. Then she'd open her eyes and see the ceiling of her bedroom at Grand Horizon Heights, her bedroom, with actual furniture and clean sheets and windows that looked out over 40 acres of Texas, and reality would crash back in. The adoption papers were signed in November. Joan Mitchell, legal daughter of James Mitchell, sister to Helen. It should have felt like a fairy tale. Sometimes it did. But most days, Joan felt like she was drowning in guilt. She had friends, had past tense, still sleeping on those streets. Still digging through dumpsters. Still invisible. You don't have to forget where you came from, James told her one morning when he found her crying in the kitchen at 3 a.m. Use it to help others. So she did. Voices for the Unseen started small. A homeless outreach program in downtown Houston, funded entirely by James, run by Joan. Hot meals, clean clothes, medical checkups. But most importantly, people who actually saw them, who looked them in the eye and said, you matter. Joan went every week. Helen came with her. They were inseparable now. Sisters by choice, not blood. Joan taught Helen about resilience, about surviving when the world wants you to disappear. Helen taught Joan that she'd never been worthless. She'd always been a hero waiting for her moment. Helen's hearing improved with therapy. She'd never have perfect hearing. 7 years of silence had left scars the doctors couldn't fully fix. But she could hear voices now. Music. Laughter. The things that mattered. They sat together on the estate lawn at sunset, watching the sky turn orange and purple. Storm clouds were rolling in from the Gulf. What does rain sound like? Helen asked, signing the words even as she spoke them. Old habits died hard. Close your eyes. Listen. Helen closed her eyes. Joan watched her face, watched the concentration, the hope. Light rain began to fall. Soft at first, then steady. Helen's face transformed. She smiled, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. Happy tears this time, not the desperate silent tears from 6 months ago. It sounds like... Helen's voice was stronger now, more confident. Like the world is whispering.
Yeah.
Joan smiled. And now you can finally hear it. Helen opened her eyes, turned to Joan, took her hand. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Joan squeezed back, rain soaking through their clothes, neither of them caring. Thank you for teaching me I was never invisible. I was just waiting for my moment. They sat there as the rain fell harder, the mansion glowing behind them in the twilight. Two girls from completely different worlds who'd saved each other. One had given the other sound. The other had given purpose. Both had found family in the most impossible way. Because one girl refused to walk past someone in pain, and another girl refused to let her savior disappear back into the shadows. Some people say miracles don't happen in places like Houston, Texas. That wealth and poverty never touch. That homeless kids and millionaires' daughters live in separate universes. Those people never met Joan and Helen. So much effort was put into the making of this video. Please support us by hitting the subscribe button, like, and share. See you on the next one.